Looks like we have one more individual who would like to speak. If you could state your name for the record, and the secretary will hand you a slip of paper where you can spell your name so we can make sure we get the spelling correct in the record.
My name is John Harmon McElroy, McElroy, and I'm a retired University of Arizona professor, and that's neither here nor there, I suppose, but it's a fact. And I have written several books on American American cultural history, of which the Constitution, along with capitalism and Christianity, I think are the three principal ingredients of our culture. And I wasn't planning on speaking, but I just cannot stay quiet in hearing people talk about the convention in Philadelphia that started in late May and lasted until the 17th of September being a runaway convention. It was not. This is an entirely mistaken view. I happen to have here in a paper that I've given out to people before the hearing that I brought up here to share with anybody that was interested, including some of the speakers that have already spoken. On February 21st, 1787, the Confederation Congress passed a resolution calling for that convention. They didn't specify Philadelphia as the place, but they gave May, the month of May, as the date. There were three principal statements in that, and I want to share that with the committee for your consideration. I am extremely in favor, and have been for years, and have been speaking on this subject of an Article 5 state-initiated amendments convention, because our Constitution is not totally broken, but it is broken because all three branches of the federal government have been illicitly changing it in the way that they have been conducting business. And it's not Democrats, and it's not Republicans, it's not this administration that's in office now or earlier ones. Okay, what did that resolution calling for the convention that wrote our Constitution for the United States? It said three things, principally. Let me quote them. They said that the convention was, quote, for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation, which is what our friends over here are all excited about, that they went beyond that. But the same resolution made these two statements, quote, to establish in these states, they were to revise the Articles of Confederation, to establish in these states a firm national government that would, quote, render the federal Constitution adequate to the exigencies of government and the preservation of the Union. Now, in the judgment of a majority of the 12 states that assembled there in Philadelphia, to carry out that broad directive of preserving the Union required replacing the Articles of Confederation. That was a judgment they made. They produced the Constitution that we've lived under for 225 years. It's a little late in the day to say that we've been living for 225 years under the result of a runaway convention. But it wasn't a runaway convention. They sent this Constitution that they were putting forth, that they had spent 4 months writing and that they had signed, they sent it back to the Confederation Congress with a letter requesting that it be submitted to conventions, quote, chosen in each state by the people thereof under the recommendation of its legislature for their assent and ratification. So, ratification of the proposed new Constitution could have been aborted by either the Confederation Congress refusing to send it to the state legislatures, or the state legislatures, on receiving it, refusing to call for the election of these ratification conventions. None of that happened. The Confederation Congress vetted the Constitution that they received from Philadelphia, and they approved it for consideration by the states. The 13 states received it, they vetted it, and they approved it for consideration by these 13 ratification conventions. So what we have then, gentlemen and lady, what we have is 27 separate bodies of elected representatives of the people of the 13 states then in existence, the Confederation Congress, the 13 state legislatures, and the 13 specially elected state ratification conventions, all playing a role in the final approval of the work done at Philadelphia. Given this fact, how could that Constitution possibly be honestly called the result of a runaway convention when 27 bodies, not counting the convention itself, which was, established by the states. So we have a situation in our country today in which the three branches of the government that was set up in 1788 with the ratification of New Hampshire in June of 1788 of what was proposed in Philadelphia. We have a situation today where all three branches of the government, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, have changed the basic requirements of the Constitution through their own action instead of changing it legitimately through the approval of 3/4 of the states. That's why we need an Article 5 Amendments Convention. It is not a new constitutional convention. The language of Article 5 is very clear. It will be an amendments convention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McElroy. Are there any questions for Ms. Just want to remind members it's not appropriate to applaud during the committee hearing or any other outbursts from the audience, but only to speak when you're recognized at the podium. Are there any questions for Mr. McElroy? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McElroy, just a comment. You say you stand for our country and our Constitution and our Christianity?
So do all these folks over here and all these folks over there and all of you. Yes, I do, sir.
Mr. McElroy, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but if you could wait till he finishes his question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
No, Mr. McElroy, again, it's just a comment, but I just want to thank you because it's so weird hearing that from a college professor.
Thank you
for being here.
Thank you for the compliment.
Representative Seal.
Mr. Chair, Mr. McElroy, you talked about how the initial convention came together in Philadelphia and did what they did. If I understand Article 5 correctly, it grants Congress the authority upon us coming together and creating an amendment. It gives Congress the authority to decide how we in the states are going to ratify it, be it through the legislature and or through a convention of ratifying convention.
Yeah.
And I think you would juxtapose it was different when we had the Articles of Confederation into the Philadelphia Convention.
I'm not sure, sir.
Okay,
I follow
so
your...
What you testified to, Mr. Chair, Mr. McElroy, you talked about when we came, under the Articles of Confederation, we came to the Philadelphia Convention.
Right.
And at that time, the states had said, or the colony states had said at that point that they wanted to, after they did what they deliberated on what they deliberated on, it would come back to the legislatures and or the state. In other words, the states would decide how it was ratified, be it the state legislature or ratification.
Oh, I see your point.
Whereas under Article 5, it seems to give to Congress the authority to determine what method is ratification. And moreover to that point, Mr. Chair, Mr. McElroy, given when we repealed the prohibition, that, from what I understand, was the only time in which we did it.
That's right.
And Congress had referred it to that. And
that's right.
So given those dynamics, do you think, given this language, we might, in turn, that might happen again? Congress might...
No, I don't think that. the reason that your comment, although certainly intelligent, is not really germane was because when they wrote that cover letter, which asked for the Confederation Congress to send it to the states and then for the state legislatures to authorize the election by the people of each state of a ratification Congress, the Constitution of the United States, including Article 5, was not in effect. It had not been ratified yet. So this was entirely outside the procedures that you're citing.
Mr. Chair, Mr. McElroy, to that point, do you think that the procedures in Article 5 are less oriented to states' rights than we were before?
Mr. McElroy.
No, I don't.
Thank you.
I think the whole point of including in the Constitution, it was, if you read James Madison's notes, which I urge everyone in the room to do, it's the next best thing to having been there when they wrote the Constitution. It's much better than the Federalist Papers, in my opinion, as to a full understanding of what was in their minds. If you consider what Madison said, they were, in his notes on the actual convention, they were in some doubt as to whether they should put in that clause about the states having any say at any time in how to propose amendments. They included it only because they were afraid, George Mason particularly, that there might come a time when the federal government itself was so corrupt that they would never propose any amendments to correct their own corruption, which, of course, is true. That's why the states have to act.
Thank you, Mr. McElroy. Any further questions?